Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got Dr. Gleb Tsipursky back with us today. He's renowned as the office whisperer. He did me the favor of giving me a really good interview about back to office and his opinions on that and whether it was going to happen and whether we're sort of into a hybrid model in the future. And it was really quite an interesting conversation, sir, and I got a lot of very positive response. Now I understand you're coming out with a book on generative AI and integrating generative AI into the workplace. Tell me about this book and your new thinking.
Sure. So the book is called ChatGPT for Thought Leaders and Content Creators, and folks can get it on Amazon in the Kindle format, in physical format, and audiobook. So ChatGPT for Thought Leaders and Content Creators. And the book talks about how do you use ChatGPT for thought leadership, for content creation? How do businesses use it to integrate generative AI into their business models, into whatever they're doing? So we can talk about that if that's what you would find helpful, Brian.
I think that'd be great. Tell me what you think we got to do.
Sure. So first of all, you want to think about what are the benefits of generative AI. So generative AI will help us optimize workflows. So let's talk about the business part of it. Help us optimize workflows, support various business initiatives, help with innovation, help with competition, enhance organizational efficiency. And you want to think about all of these goals. So first, you want to set out these goals. What are your goals? What do you actually want to accomplish? I just listed out a bunch of things, right? Generative AI can do all of that. But you want to think about what you want to accomplish in your business. You probably don't want to tackle all of those at once. And so you want to think about what is your priority? What do you actually want to accomplish through generative AI? You have to understand what it's about, what it can do for you. Those are the things it can do for you. Now you want to think about what is the priority for your business in terms of what you want to do. So one of my clients, for example, that I help in integrating generative AI into their business is really focusing on optimizing their accounting department. So they are looking at a number of various accounting functions, and they see that they have a number of accountants, and they can significantly reduce their headcount through integrating generative AI as a tool. And so that's what they decided to focus on, the kind of as an initial pilot case study of using generative AI. So they integrated generative AI into their accounting department. They used a variety of functions that helped them speed up their accounting and made a number of people unnecessary. And so they were able to reduce their accounting headcount by 30%. And so that's
by how much? 30%?
30%. That's right.
So 30%. You got to tell me what are people doing? Because my sense is that ChatGPT and stuff like that were reasonably good at sort of doing English writing. But you're talking about actually doing accounting numbers. And one of the criticisms I've had about ChatGPT is that sometimes they come up with fake stuff. That's going to be a huge risk if they're doing numbers, are they not?
Not really. No, so not if you have it controlled and if you train it on your company's data. So it's going to come up with fake stuff if it's not trained on your company's data, but of course you need to train it on your company's data and have it reference that data. It's actually quite good at math if you know how to use it. So recently, Google DeepMind came out with a paper showing that the Google version is able to get a silver medal at the Math Olympiad. So the news of it being bad at math are actually quite outdated. It's very good at math. It's very good at charts. It's very good at tables. So a lot of that, I mean, that has been quite effective for my clients.
I find that fascinating. So give me an example. What would be the role that they would be doing in accounting, and what functions would they be potentially replacing?
So they fill a number of data entry functions, a number of processing functions, a variety of functions that have to do with kind of basic clerical data processing, data entry, data scraping, like stuff that previously, for example, if you had, so my client had to go, they had a PDF with a number of accounting information, and they had to transfer a number of those things from the PDF into their system, into the system that handles accounting, to NetSuite. And so they had to do that. There was one system connecting to another. of their inside systems connecting to NetSuite, so they had to do a manual process previously. Now they're able to use ChatGPT to, well, the Microsoft version of it, which is trained on their systems and is secure. And so they're able to upload that PDF and automatically scrape all that data and get it into their accounting and payroll software. And that has saved them quite a bit of time that used to take 2 people to do previously. And so that's just an example of a significant amount of work that was greatly reduced by using generative AI.
So the visual recognition of the PDF is accurate enough and sufficient such that you don't need to have a person doing it. The AI can actually read the PDF document, take off the numbers, and put it in the right spots.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And previously that had to be manual labor. And so that's great. And that's just saving them quite a bit of time. So they had they had, no, yeah, they had two people doing this task, or they just didn't need to have this doing this task anymore. And so that's an example. And they had other savings in terms of accounting, other sorts of things like this that they were able to just get rid of. So and that's just an accounting. So other functions, there are plenty of other functions that folks
Give
use.
us
So
give us some other examples.
sure. So let's talk about innovation. So we'll talk about innovation as another example. So I was working with another client that wanted to use generative AI as an innovation tool. So this is we talked about last time about bringing people back into the office, hybrid work, remote work. This is a mostly remote company, and they had some trouble with innovation in remote settings, which is a notorious issue, that you have trouble doing brainstorming in remote settings. So instead of doing the traditional brainstorming, getting people together in a room, they did virtual brainstorming, which was not as good as in-person brainstorming. And so instead, what I showed them how to do was use generative AI as a tool for brainstorming. So there are a number of steps involved in doing so. The first step is to have everyone on the team choose a topic that they're going to brainstorm. So let's say there's a problem you want to solve. Let's say you want to launch a new feature on your product. So let's come up with that. Let's use that as an example. And I guided them through that case study. So they wanted to launch a new feature. And so you have 6 people on the team. Each person individually uses generative AI to come up with their own ideas about what feature should be the new feature on the product. And they're working with generative AI, and generative AI is actually quite creative. So people really underestimate the creativity of generative AI. And the nice thing is that it's not a problem that it hallucinates, because everyone hallucinates when they're brainstorming, right? That's part of the process. So you create a number of ideas. Generative AI creates a number of ideas for the feature. And the generative AI is able to explore a lot of parts of the innovation space that people might not be even thinking about. And so each of those 6 people comes up with 10 ideas based on their interactions with generative AI. And they curate those ideas. So they choose the 10 of the best ideas. Generative AI can come up with like 1,000 ideas. And so they choose the 10 best ideas. Then what they do, that's the first step. The second step is that they
Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
So what do you do with the generative AI? You say, give me your ideas, or you put in some facts and then say, come up with some new ideas? Like, how do you interact with the robot, with the generative AI to get these ideas?
So they had a tech product that generative AI was trained on their internal company data. They knew how people were using the tech product, their complaints, their concerns. And so people prompted it in different ways. But the general idea was, hey, here's people's concerns, here are people's desires, come up with, based on the information that you're trained on, and based on these complaints and based on these user desires, user requests, come up with a new feature that would be not too difficult to implement and that would optimize for the kind of user requests that are out there and address user complaints. And so the 6 different people had different ways of prompting, and they, of course, had their own ideas about what to pay most attention to. So they worked with generative AI to, each individual person separately worked with generative AI to develop a number of ideas based on the information available.
Unbelievable. And then what's your second step?
So second step is each person takes those 10 ideas, and they have generative AI take on the role of different functions in the company. So marketing function, sales function, operations, programming, product development, customer service, HR, legal, compliance, and give feedback on each of the 10 ideas and see which of the 10 ideas made the most sense from an internal perspective. And so based on that, each person came up with 3 top ideas. So that's the second step. Then they took those 3 top ideas and they took an external perspective. So again, we have those buyer personas, and they had generative AI take on the role of individual buyer personas. So this was an insurance product. So insurance, small business owner who is looking for a certain type of insurance, or middle market company, large company, whatever, having various people from various companies take on the role of those people and give feedback on the potential product. And then they came up with one top idea out of that process. And finally, the fourth step is that they had generative AI create a marketing plan and a business plan and a pitch deck around that idea. And then they sent the pitch deck, the marketing plan, and the business plan to all of their team members. So you had 6 people sending 6 business plans, 6 pitch decks, 6 marketing plans to each other. And so the last iteration, the last step, step 5, was everyone meeting. So having a meeting, a virtual meeting, and discussing those 6 ideas. And it's very well fleshed out ideas at this stage. And then deciding on the best one, and then working on it moving forward.
Fascinating. So again, you've got a whole section in your book about using generative AI to write stuff. And I guess that's what I thought that generative AI did the most and best. You're talking about it doing accounting. You're talking about it doing innovation. Yeah. Fascinating. We're going to have to take a break for some messages and come back and chat a little bit more about generative AI and how it's going to change business, because it certainly sounds from our guest tonight that it's going to have a profound impact on us all. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. He is a best-selling author. He's a PhD, and he is a very well-known speaker and author. He helps leaders use hybrid work to improve retention and productivity while cutting costs. He serves as the CEO of a boutique future of work consultancy called Disaster Avoidance Experts, which helps organizations adopt a hybrid-first culture instead of incrementally improving on the traditional office-centric culture. You've got a PhD in behavioral economics. How did you get from a PhD in behavioral economics into being a international speaker, writing books on numerous different topics, becoming an expert on hybrid workplace, and then you've got this book that I understand is about cognitive biases?
Mm-hmm.
Like, tell me your story, buddy.
Sure. So I've always been really fascinated with how people make decisions. When I was 18 in 1999, there was the .com boom, when companies like Pets.com, Webvan.com, and so on were praised in the Wall Street Journal as being the best, as being the future, all of that. And then when I was 21, just a couple of years later, there was a .com bust. And the same people who were praised in the Wall Street Journal are now being criticized in the Wall Street Journal. But their leadership style didn't change. Their decision-making didn't change. So that really helped me realize that even top business leaders and journalists, commentators don't really know what they're talking about when they talk about decision making. That's what made me really interested in studying decision making. And so that's what made me fascinated. And I went into studying decision making. I got a PhD in the history of behavioral economics, looking at how people make their decisions in historical and contemporary settings, and especially focused on cognitive biases. So the aspects of our mind that cause us to make poor decisions, because our minds are not really wired for the modern environment. And so that is what I've been doing. That's what I've been fascinated with, looking
And
at decision making.
your book was called Never Go With Your Gut.
Mhm.
How pioneering leaders make the best decisions and avoid business disasters. Never go with your gut. I thought, live with your passion, go with your gut, listen to your heart, were all these buzzwords that people used. And you're saying, no, don't do it. Why?
It's very simple. When we go with our gut, we're essentially doing the primitive, savage, civilized, uncivilized thing. We're, again, going with our intuition, but our intuition is not really made for the modern world. It's made for the ancient savanna environment. And it feels good to go with our gut. So it feels good for business leaders, for example, to make quick decisions. And those quick decisions, they feel good, but they often have pretty disastrous consequences at all levels of our society, whether it's business, whether it's on marriage, whether it's politics. People make bad decisions all the time because they tend to go with their gut. They don't look at the data and they feel something. They think that their feelings are true and accurate. Well, their feelings, they feel good, but what you feel doesn't necessarily indicate anything about the reality of the situation. So you're often going to be misled around the reality. So for example, one of the biggest cognitive biases we have, and cognitive bias is a term for the specific ways that our mind is miswired because we are not in the savanna environment, the ancestral savanna environment for which we're wired. So loss aversion is a big one. In the ancestral savanna environment, it was very dangerous for us to lose resources because we had very few resources. So when we lost resources, that was going to be really quite bad and likely to lead us to die. In the modern environment, it's much less risky to lose resources because we're much less likely to die if we lose resources. And it causes us to take less risks than we want to, than we need to. So for example, we were talking about generative AI. And with loss aversion is one of the biggest problems I see, where so many people, whether it's business leaders, whether it's their employees, they are unwilling to start using generative AI. Employees often feel like, hey, if I'll start using generative AI, it will take my job. Leaders often feel like, oh, if I start using generative AI, I will reveal how little I know, and then I will lose my status and power and position and prestige and authority. And so for both of those leaders, for both of those reasons, we're seeing people greatly underusing generative AI, whereas really, if you start using generative AI, that is the skill of the future. And if you don't start using it, you will lose out much more than if you do start using it. And so that is just an example in terms of loss aversion, how I've seen, connecting the first part to the first part of our interview, how people are making bad decisions around generative AI, whether employees or leaders.
Are there other typical cognitive biases other than loss aversion?
Absolutely. So another one is called the status quo bias. So the status quo bias is our preference for the status quo. Now, in the Savannah environment, it was a very precarious environment. And so if the situation changed, it was likely to be in a bad direction and quite likely to cause us to die. And so our preference in our intuition is to be worried and afraid of the unknown and to orient towards stability. But stability in the modern world is not a good thing. The modern world is full of change, whether it's the 2008, 2009 fiscal crisis, whether it's the rise of the smartphone, the rise of the internet, the pandemic, the rise of remote work, the rise of generative AI. All of those are fundamental changes, and we need to welcome those changes and try to take advantage of them rather than try to hold on to the past. And so obvious connection to generative AI is that people would tend to be afraid of the unknown, worried about the unknown. And again, leaders especially, I've seen this, where they don't want to admit and acknowledge that they don't know something. And so they're not even willing to start using it because they don't want to appear like noobs and reveal their lack of knowledge.
You've got a section, chapter in your book about using ChatGPT to write a whole book.
Yes, that's right. Yep. So yes, that's exactly right. So in terms of the content creators and thought leaders, that is something that you can very easily do. Use ChatGPT to write a book. And that is part of what I encourage people to be able to do. There are so many people who say, I have a book in me, and they just don't have the ability and the time to sit down and write a book. And so you can use ChatGPT to write a whole book. And of course, you are going to be, just like in the of using generative AI for innovation, for creativity, for brainstorming, you will be the editor. So in the future, something that people don't realize nearly sufficiently is that content creation and idea generation is going to be much less valuable, whereas content curation and idea curation will be much more valuable. So in the same way, you can use generative AI to write a book with generative AI in the role of content creator and you in the role of content evaluator. So your goal will be then to evaluate the quality of the content that generative AI produces and the ideas that generative AI produces, guide it in the right direction. And that is really the skill of the future that people need to learn if they want to succeed.
So was your book written by you or was it written by ChatGPT?
It was written with both. I used ChatGPT to write the book, absolutely. And I talk about that in the book. So that's something I'm really happy about, that it's a really good tool to use. So I had it generate certain passages and then I edited them. I curated them and I put them together. Some things I liked, some things I didn't. So I edited certain things about it and I put them together in certain ways. I have some things that I had other ideas, so I had to generate other ideas and go on to generate certain sections, chapters, and I talk about in the book exactly the process of how you do so. And I show and tell of how you would use ChatGPT in the process of writing a book.
I was at a session where someone was speaking about generative AI, and he said you got to be good to your robot. You got to get to know your robot. Do you agree?
I think you need to get to know your tool. So the question you asked, let's say, did you write your book or did ChatGPT write your book? It's kind of like when calculators were invented, like you asking, did you solve the math problem or did your calculator solve the math problem? Of course, you solved the math problem using the calculator. And so in the same way, ChatGPT is a tool. If some people want to anthropomorphize it and treat it like, hey, you want to be good to your calculator, you want to be good to your computer, that might be a good way for them to think about how to interact with the computer or the calculator or the smartphone. You know, you can be good to your smartphone, but I don't need that mentality. But if some people need it and if they find it helpful, great for them.
But does the ChatGPT, the robot, need to get to know you and your style if you want to be the author of the book? Or no, it's helpful having it just be completely independent.
Yeah, it certainly should know. So I wrote a number of books before that myself without the help of the calculator, I mean ChatGPT. And so I just uploaded those into ChatGPT and had it know my style and through that context and had it use that to inform the writing style of the book, of the new book that I wrote.
This is really fascinating. I really appreciate you sharing with us. So one of your chapters is on the history of ChatGPT. Maybe we can take a break for some messages and come back with Dr. Gleb Tsipursky and ask him to give us a little bit of the sense of history and where he thinks it's going. Everyone, we're chatting tonight about ChatGPT, we're generative AI, artificial intelligence, and how our guest, Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, who's really a world-renowned expert and author and speaker on this and other topics, thinks it's going to change the workplace and how we need to adopt it in the workplace. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. You're coming to us from Chapel Hill, is that correct?
From Columbus, Ohio today. So yeah,
Columbus,
Chapel
Ohio.
Hill. Yep, I got my PhD at Chapel Hill. Then I got my professor job at the Ohio State University. So where I am right now. Well, I'm not at Ohio State anymore, but I am in Columbus, Ohio.
And I appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you so much. So you've got a section on the history of generative AI. You know, I think a lot of people think that ChatGPT just sort of came out of nowhere just this past year, but it's been around for a while. Is that not the case?
Yes, it has been the case. And if you want to know the real history of AI, you really have to go back to the post-World War II period, where there was the first wave of excitement about the potential of AI. In fact, Alan Turing came up with the Turing test, where you might have heard the term the Turing test. That's where the idea is that, hey, if you are exchanging messages with someone and you can't tell whether it's a human or a robot, that's an example of where you can really say that something is intelligent, where you can't tell a difference between a robot and a human. And so the first ideas, theories were developed already after World War II. And then we had a number of developments in terms of improving the computer capacity to actually enact some of the ideas and theories that were around for a while already. And the first models in terms of what we would call deep learning, deep neural networks, started appearing around the 2010s when they were image labelers, where something can label, hey, is this a cat or a dog? And that they were already started being helpful, for example, in medical purposes. So labeling things and helping doctors. And so we already had tools that were using the framework that would currently be known as the chatbot already for a while. And there were generative transformers, pre-trained transformers really became possible, not possible, but to reformulate that, they became increasingly capable of being what they currently are with a paper from Google DeepMind in 2018 called Attention is All You Need. The idea of the paper was that if you increase the amount of data that you put into the generative pre-trained transformer and the amount of compute resources, chips, I mean, the kind of things made by NVIDIA and AMD, then you will be able to scale up the intelligence of this model. And what the model does is essentially it predicts, based on what you're putting into it, what the next words or sentences should be. So the more context it has, the better it's able to predict. You know, right now, it's taking in all the data essentially from the internet and is able to use that to predict what the next words should be based on that information. And so we had versions GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3, which I was already playing with before they became really popular. And they were already increasingly smart, increasingly capable, not nearly as capable as today's models, but you could see the potential there. And with of course, the launch of OpenAI's ChatGPT bot, which was the GPT 3.5 with the chat function. That's what really made things popular in October 2022, I believe. So that's when things became really popular. People started noticing it and started paying attention just because they were amazed by how smart it was, and it appeared to pass the Turing test. So it appeared, so going back to the Turing test, that's when you can really sense that you're speaking to something that is pretty intelligent. And then we had the version 4, now for Omni, and that's just the OpenAI version. The Google Gemini 1.5 Pro is quite good. The Anthropic Claude Sonnet model 3.5 is quite good. So we now have a number of top models that are able to not simply use text, but also generate quite good images and videos and sounds and use, we talked about using math, using accounting, graph generation, data transformation, They're able to do programming really quite well. So these are really something that is going to impact our society, our life in very big ways. And there are a number of things that businesses really need to think about as they're thinking about how to integrate these tools into what they do.
Let's talk about medicine for a second. I've been told that Chat GPT or generative AI does a better job of diagnosing cancers than medical doctors do.
So it does a better job of visually identifying certain cancers than not diagnosing based on, it's not yet at the stage where it's talking to patients, looking at all the symptoms and getting all the symptoms and so on, not doing biopsies. But it is better at, let's say, looking at a scan, a mammogram, and identifying cancer compared to a human radiologist. So it would be so in terms of analyzing and scanning visual information, it's actually better. And so we can definitely say that it will augment greatly radiologists and various other pathologists who use visual information to be able to evaluate what's going on. That visual information on a scan, not actually looking at a human body, which is not the majority of visual information, but looking at scans. The reason that generative AI is able to do that is that we have a lot of information in the form of scans that we can then say, go back and say, was this a cancer or was this not a cancer? So generative AI tools in medicine were trained on that information. And because they were trained on that information, they are now able to do better than humans on the kind of information, those visual evaluations. They're not better in terms of being an actual doctor in the medical office, but in terms of being able to evaluate scans, they're definitely better.
Okay, but you started out by saying people shouldn't be worried about it. If your accounting company, your company was able to reduce its accounting staff by 30%, and you're talking about where it can ChatGPT can do accounting better or equal to such that we can reduce our staff by 30%. It can do innovation and creativity, and it can do radiology, or at least read radiology outputs as good, if not better, than radiologists could. Isn't this going to risk a lot of entry level and middle level jobs?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no question. I didn't say you shouldn't be worried. You should definitely be worried if you're in those jobs. We already are having a number of displacements, a number of companies. I mean, I told you about the company I worked with accounting staff. A number of companies are not hiring or firing programmers because generative AI is great at programming. One of the best things it's at is programming. So definitely less jobs in programming, or at least that's what appears to be the case. Then there are a number of jobs associated with writing that are being displaced, a number of jobs that are associated with graphic design. Right now, you might have heard that the video game union, actors union, is striking because it doesn't want video game studios to use generative AI in video games and sort of emulating actors' voices. It's a big threat for actors. It's a big threat for many people. So that's why I was talking about in the beginning that where people have loss aversion. They're like, well, I don't want to use generative AI because I'm worried it will replace my job. You should be really worried that it will replace your job if you don't use it, because what will replace your job is not generative AI, but some other person who's using generative AI. So for example, in the accounting department that I was mentioning, it's not that generative AI replaced people's jobs. It's that others who are using generative AI were able to replace the jobs of those people who weren't able to pick up generative AI quickly enough.
So if you were a company and you wanted to get started using generative AI, what would you suggest we do?
So the first thing to do is I see a number of common frustrations and challenges in companies. One is having employees who are resistant to change. They fear AI displacement. And then there's just a lack of understanding and expertise in generative AI technology. You also want to think about how you're going to integrate it with your existing systems. That's always an issue. Concerns about data privacy and security, so you want to think about that. And you want to address perceived loss of human touch and what that will do. So thinking about all of those things, that's going to be really important. So in order to really think about going forward, the first things you want to focus on is learning. So you want to get your people and yourself to learn about generative AI. So create a positive culture to reinforce learning, to encourage risk-taking and experimentation, reduce the risk of failure, be okay with people failing, and provide consistent support and feedback, provide them with training on how to use generative AI. So I'll give you some examples of companies I worked with. So one thing you want to think about is getting people. I can guarantee to you that there are already a number of people in your company who are using generative AI surreptitiously if you haven't given them official permission. You want to give them official permission. You say, it's okay, we know you've been using generative AI, that's great. We want to know how you've been using it and where you found it to be most useful. So you want to get that information out that is already inside your company. And then you want to pair those generative AI pioneers who've been using generative AI with others. So at a mid-sized tech company, I had early adopters work with as peer mentors and trainers who covered diverse topics from generative AI, ranging from coding to content creation to prompting. And that really was helpful for the company to integrate knowledge about generative AI into the company as a whole. So another thing you want to think about is providing official training, like workshops. So in-depth training on generative AI tools and techniques and how people can apply these techniques. So that will be something very helpful for folks. Then you want to think about one approach that I found quite useful is gamification. So having people having some kind of progress in how well people learn generative AI and reward progress with badges, with certificates, and create that both competitive and collaborative learning experience. So that as part of doing so, you want to evaluate how well people are learning this tool. So track learning progress and track outcomes in learning. Use data to identify those skill gaps and training needs, and personalize the learning experience. So you want to make sure that it's personalized to people's needs and continuously improve it based on learning and data. So provide that continuous learning and improvement over time to integrate it into daily work routines. And that's how you'll build a learning culture. So that's, I would say, is the first step. Having that learning, that is absolutely the first step.
Okay, so we're going to get started learning. If one individual wanted to start doing things, you've got a section on writing memos, you got a section on writing blogs. Is the best way to just start with something like that? Or is it to try to delve into accounting? Can it do an Excel worksheet for me? What are the things that you think generative AI can do for companies?
Absolutely.
Can it design a building? Can it put together blueprints?
I wouldn't start with designing buildings and blueprints. I don't know. I have not worked with architectural firms, so I'm not sure about that. But I've definitely worked with like accounting, and I've worked with coding, and I've worked with content creation. So it depends on your job. If you do a lot of writing, then of course, start with doing writing. If you're doing content creating, if you're doing social media, it does great social media posts. If you do graphic design, have it work on graphics for you. If you do video, have it create videos for you. If you do all of that sort of stuff, audio, it does that. So that's kind of one category of work. If you wanted to write emails for you, if you wanted to summarize, some managers, for example, love using it to write performance evaluation reports, summarizing and then editing it themselves, because that's one of the most hated parts of jobs of managers from managers I talk to.
So I get hundreds of emails a day. Can I automate responses?
You can. There are programs that will connect your email to generative AI tools, and they would allow you to automate responses. And it would be able to, the challenge you would find is that it doesn't know what you intend to reply. So that would be a challenge. But what you can do is you can say something like, I want to agree to this offer, or I want to put this person off, and we'll write a nice email agreeing to something, or putting somebody off for a while. So yes, you'll definitely be able to do that, to automate it through generative AI tools that connected to your inbox. So yes, you can use it to write emails. You can use it to improve your emails. I also use it to do that. I sometimes draft an email, run it for generative AI, or have it draft an email for me. Then for coding, if you're doing programming, I mean, programmers already are using it very widely. And if they're not, that's a serious, serious problem, because it's definitely increasing the speed of programmers who are using it. If you're working with Excel sheets and you're not using generative AI, like, what are you doing? Generative AI is great at Excel spreadsheets. So using it for Excel spreadsheets, various functions, yeah, absolutely. You really need to do that. And Microsoft is, of course, full in on generative AI. So it's integrated Microsoft Copilot into Excel, into Word, into Outlook, into all of the tools for Microsoft. And of course, Google is doing that with Gemini and so on.
Is there one better than the other, or are they all pretty well the same?
Oh, I like the Microsoft tool partially because you can be confident that it's secure in terms of your company data, and you can pre-train it on your company data. And so that makes it really nice for enterprise use. So if you're thinking in terms from a business perspective, and I'm doing consulting for businesses, I tend to recommend that they go with Microsoft, the Microsoft Copilot, and then use the generative AI that's part of Microsoft Copilot. It doesn't cost much. It's like a $20 add-on per person, well, per month. So per month. So not too much. The Google version is something that it's still quite good, but it's not going to be pre-trained on your individual data, on your company data or your individual data. So that's a little bit more challenging to use if you wanted to be more aware of the context.
It's really fascinating. We're going to take a final break for some messages and come back with our guest. And I'm going to ask you, Dr. Tsipursky, how transformative is this? How's our world going to be different in 5 years? Let's take a break and come back with some concluding comments in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. This is really interesting. It could change jobs. It could take away jobs. It could improve companies' performance. It's going to be pretty transformative. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. He is a very smart gentleman. He's written numerous different books, over 300 articles. He's an international speaker and author. He's been called the office whisperer because he was an expert on sort of hybrid workforce. And he's one of these individuals that says it's a trend that's here to stay and that we need to adapt to it, that we're not going to be able to go back to the office all the time. He's studied behavioral science and has written a book on cognitive decision-making, I guess, cognitive biases of decision-making. And his most recent book is all about generative AI. If people want to get the book, how do they do that, Doctor?
So it's called ChatGPT for Thought Leaders and Content Creators. Just go to Amazon. You can get the Kindle version, the paperback version, the audiobook. Again, ChatGPT for Thought Leaders and Content Creators on Amazon.
I spoke with one person who said that this was as transformative as the internet. And then another person said, no, it's even far more transformative. This is like the Industrial Revolution. This is the next phase of technological change, from agrarian to industrial to something new. Give me a sense of how transformative you think generative AI is.
I think it definitely, in the most radical case, has the potential to be as transformative as the Industrial Revolution. The question is whether we have the resources to take advantage of it. So right now, for example, generative AI is already taking up a lot of electricity resources. And the concern is that we just don't have enough electricity resources to take full advantage of it. So you're thinking about the kind of transformation that it can bring about. Right now, we've just been talking about the only digital tasks, coding, we've been talking about writing, content creation, we've been talking about Excel spreadsheets. Those are all fundamentally important tasks, but they're all digital. Right now, generative AI is also being trained as robots. So robots are increasingly using generative AI to be able to do tasks that they previously wouldn't have been able to do. So for example, we talked about generative AI visually being able to recognize things. And with the visual things that it's able to recognize, we talked about medicine, in medical exams, I can very well imagine that robots trained on using generative AI would be able to perform surgery quite within the next decade. And that would be pretty amazing if you have robots within the next decade performing surgery. So that's like separately, independently, with human oversight, but just independently by themselves, better than if a human was performing surgery, because they're able to see things better and evaluate things better and not make the wrong move, which humans unfortunately do sometimes. And so that's an example of surgery. There are plenty of other tasks that generative AI is able to do right now already. It's able to recognize objects, pick them up, put them down. You're having increasing robotization in a variety of factories, in a variety of warehouses, partially because generative AI is brought to bear. So I think the combination of the digital tasks and the physical tasks that with robotization, that is going to really impact things very thoroughly. The question is, do we have the resources of electricity to actually take advantage of everything that generative AI can bring? Because electricity is pretty scarce, and we're also using, for example, more electricity for electric vehicles and other purposes of electrification. And there's not going to be enough electricity for everything. So that is a serious concern that can put brakes on the scaling growth of generative AI.
This is fascinating. I really appreciate you talking with us about generative AI and how it's going to change our workforce, change our lives, change our world. So I've done almost 2,000 interviews, each one 45 minutes, as you know, not people as smart as you, but people almost as smart as you, over the course of the last 3 years. Could I take all those interviews, have generative AI transcribe them all, and ask ChatGPT to write a book?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You can absolutely do that. It wouldn't be a problem at all. You'd want to have a theme for the book. You can't have 3,000 chapters for the book, but yes, you can do something like choose the best interviews or thematically group them on a variety of topics. But yes, absolutely. That would definitely be a good strategy to do, and have a book written about the most important topics or whatever you want to do.
With all the video, could I have ChatGPT create a movie out of all my videos and interviews?
Not currently, but then probably in one or two models. So right now, the Sora model of OpenAI can create a 60-minute clip, a 60-second clip. And so probably within the next couple of years, you would be able to create a video, or you would be able to create a movie. You can certainly create a book, and you can have generative AI do an audio transcript of the book, so you don't have to read it yourself. So you would be able to have a book and then an audiobook, but not a video yet.
And the audiobook, who would the voice be?
What you would do is you have a lot of recordings of your voice, and it would emulate your voice. So you would feed it into generative AI. 11 Labs is one. I have no affiliation with 11 Labs, but 11 Labs is one prominent company that creates voices that are customized based on you giving it samples of your voice, and then it creates a narrator that would be just like your voice or very close to your voice. And then you would use that to read your book.
If someone can do that, if generative AI can do that, what's to stop them producing a podcast, a quote, a video, or whatever of a presidential candidate that's completely fake?
Nothing. That's already been done. That's done, and those misinformation is spreading on a variety of social media. Absolutely.
How are we going to
Yep.
know in the future what's real and what's fake, what's generated by generative AI?
Ideally, the closed models provided by companies like OpenAI, by companies like Microsoft, by Google, by Anthropic, would have some kind of watermark to indicate that this is generative AI. The problem is that open source models will not need to have that, and people can use it for whatever purpose. So it will be pretty hard in the future as models get better and better to tell what is produced by generative AI or not. So it's just it's not going to be something that you'll be able to tell. Just like there are going to be some things that right now, Photoshop, you can do things that you would not be able to tell whether it's a Photoshop photo or not. You will not be able to tell whether it's a generative AI produced video or not.
Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I look forward to reading all of your book. I've read the first introduction and the chapter headlines and your conclusion, and it's a great book. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me on, Brian. Really appreciate it.
Remind everyone of the title.
ChatGPT for thought leaders and content creators. Available on Amazon, paperback, audiobook, or Kindle. Again, ChatGPT for thought leaders and content creators.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. I encourage you to think about this topic because I think it's going to change our workforce. It's going to change our lives. It's got a chance of changing the world. And I think that Dr. Tsipursky has given us an interesting overview of it. Really appreciate it. And make sure we don't have those cognitive biases of being afraid of change and resisting. Let's make sure that we're open and try to understand it and see how it can help us in our daily job, in our life, and in our world, because it could really change things. Better diagnosis of cancer, better diagnosis of our political problems, better economic strategies. Who knows? We'll see. And maybe even some good movies and books. Thanks. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Good night.